My name's Garrett Phelan. I'm an artist. I work with sound, photography, animation, film, many different platforms. And I've been making art for about 35 years. I'm largely self-taught as an artist. I've worked in the art world for a very long time in advance of making art. And I'm from North County Dublin, and I like to think of myself as a Fingalian and very influenced by my family background. Both parents would be from North County Dublin as well. I went to school in an area right beside the Hugh Lane Gallery. So on my lunch breaks, I'd always be popping in and out of the Hugh Lane. And so that became a real privilege. I had a sense of privilege. I never was daunted by going into galleries. You know, I was always engaged, but the moment I wanted to become an artist was when I was cycling home from school one day. It must have been the end of October, and there was this incredible sunset and these incredible, all the buildings were silhouetted, but the sky was every colour you could imagine. So I went home and I snuck out onto my garage roof, because we were forbidden from going out onto the garage roof. And I had pastels and a small sketchbook, and it was kind of cold and damp, but I snuggled into my coat and I leaned up against the bricks of the house, and then I just attempted to do this, plein air kind of scenario. Like, I didn't really understand what I was doing, but I was doing it. And I did it, and I made this really cool drawing and pastel coloured drawing, and I just went, I really want to do this. You know, this is actually, I'll be up for doing this. I ended up putting my portfolio together for NCAD. I got my place, actually. I didn't get the leaving cert. I didn't get my leaving cert. So I didn't have my 2 honours and 4 passes to go to art college. So I had to give up the place, couldn't go, very disappointing. And then I applied for a job in a graphic design studio, and I got a junior finished artist, it was called. And I slowly but surely discovered that graphics and visual communications was something I didn't want to do. And then, but over the course of the period of working for this company, and it was a great company, I had a portfolio of finished graphic work that was produced and published and printed. And I went into the art college one day and I said, do you have any spaces available? And they said, yes, come on in. So then I went in, and then I did about a year in the art college, and I hated it, fine art. I didn't like the process. I didn't like the lack of structure in being a student and having to be autonomous in how you produce work. So there were other students, fine art students, that were much better than me. And I was never in that position in my life before. I was always good, and I was always the go-to fella for making art or doing posters for bands or something like that. But suddenly I was in a space with 30 people, and they so a lot of them were much better than me. And I crumbled under that, actually. I found it very difficult. Yeah, I would call around to all the art galleries and ask for work. And then the last place I went to was a place called the Hendricks Gallery, the David Hendricks Gallery. And it was owned by a man called Vincent Ferguson. And it was run by a woman called Lyon Biennial. And I asked, could I work for free? Could I help out or whatever? And she gave me a job, which was pretty cool. And then I got to know Vincent as a collector, a major art collector, Vincent Ferguson. And then I basically cleaned out the storeroom for a few months, and I got to understand that there was more to life than Picasso. There was Irish artists, really important Irish artists. And I got this incredible induction of education through working, actually working as an arts worker in a commercial gallery. And then I graduated to selling work, and then I left there, and then I went down to Temple Bar Gallery and Studios, and I was immersed in some of the best artists in the country working in their studios in these cold, leaky, very, the facilities were really poor. You know, I mean, studios were separated by plastic sheeting and there was no heating in the building, so winters were cold, the rain was pouring in, the toilets were blocked. And we got very down and dirty, myself and another administrator, John Hunt, the great John Hunt from the Hunt Museum and the family of the Hunts. And we worked very hard at trying to, you know, reawaken this great space, Temple Bar Gallery and Studios, which was kind of running to rack and ruin at that point. And then I moved from there up to the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and was part of the technical crew, and just the education that I was getting was very much that of like an apprentice, the tradition of being an apprentice to an artist. And I was learning all about the techniques, the different artists. I was learning to keep my mind completely open. So that education of working and learning all about how the art business works, learning how an artist represents itself when coming into a gallery, giving people slides of their work in those days, you know, showing portfolios to gallerists, displaying your work, learning how to be a technician, learning how to present your work in the best possible way in any venue. But what was a great experience was helping artists realize their ideas. And I suddenly realized I was a very good administrator. I was very good at organizing things. I had a motivation to set up exhibitions, to be the person that maybe would curate the exhibition, all of that side of things, that administrative aspect of it, I was very, very good at. And I realized that I had a great advantage there when I became an artist, and I chose to go back to making art because it's not something I could bury or deny anymore. I needed to communicate what was inside my thinking and then my ideas and all that. I realized I had an added advantage, which was my administrative side, or my understanding how to apply to the Arts Council for funding, knowing how to go about doing that and not being frightened of it, not being wary of it, not being resentful if I got refused by a gallery, or not being resentful if I got refused a grant. Learning about all the disappointments, but learning also about the successes, and having that education of watching other artists, really top artists, go through that process was my fundamentally, and still is fundamentally, my education, because I'm still learning about all of that process. So usually if I make something, if I make anything, at the core of that making of the something will be something very personal. So for example, at the core of the Hyde project, which is part of this exhibition, the Hyde Suite is one of the elements in the Hyde project, which is part of this exhibition. At the core of that project is my mother. So it's about an expression of love to my mother. Fundamentally, that's what it's about. And then it's layered on with other associated thoughts and ideas and questions and queries. The Hyde project was and is a commission by Fingal County Council under its Percent for Art scheme through Caroline Cowley, the Public Art Coordinator. And they were interested because I'd previously made a work around my father called Racer, which was a film based on Balcarrick Tower and Donabate Beach in the north of County Dublin. And I qualify under their remit because both my parents are Fingalian, and I would be a Fingalian. And I wanted to look at my mother in this situation, because I did a project around my dad. So I said, and at the start, like I was saying, at the core of every project I do, it's something deeply personal, and you can't really get more deeply personal if you make work about your children, or you make work about your family or your loved ones. So, and I choose to do that because it makes me very seriously commit to the project that I'm working on. And my mother has this extraordinary passion for nature, not an academic one. She has a natural instinct beyond a standard person for just the love of the colour of flowers, the love of the colour of the birds, the love of the song of the birds. And I grew up beside the Botanic Gardens. So we'd always take these very long, leisurely walks with my mother, and we'd just, immerse ourselves in nature. And so I set about researching what I was going to do, and I wanted to look at monument, and I wanted to keep it personal, and I wanted to look at the landscape of which I grew up around and have a very close affinity with. So I chose to build and construct a project that had 4 parts. One was a radio station called Hyde FM, which will happen in 2025 in April. One was a sculpture, a fixed sculpture site. One was a series of prints, and one was a website. I chose to make and select 28 birds from where I situate the Hyde sculpture. And the Hyde sculpture is in the form of a bird hide. It's a large piece of land surrounded by lots of lovely trees and a long avenue pathway which leads you to this place, which is a concrete structure where you get inside, and then when you look out, you observe birds on an estuary, which are telescope or your binoculars. And that estuary, during the migration period, will have up to 28,000 birds of all different types migrating, coming and going. So I chose 28 specific birds indicative of that site. That's what makes up the Hyde suite, which you have downstairs. So I made 28 birds in a beautiful red colander box, and then the person that purchases that, because it's an edition of 28, they get to choose whether they frame them and exhibit them or keep them in the colander box, this beautiful red embossed box called the Hyde suite. I think working off-site, not necessarily working in the gallery, going to a forest and creating a work of art that exists in a forest and inviting the public to come far away from the convenience of the city centre art gallery, and you bring them out to some remote space and you get them to sit with maybe a video work that you produce, or a drawing, or a sculpture, or whatever, is as equally powerful, and that process is as equally important. And it makes people connect in a radically different way. With the Hyde project, I come with the art. I'm part of that artwork, generally speaking. I can't do it all of the time, but I try very hard to be present when people come out to the Hyde sculpture in Lusk, which is permanent and will be there for 100 years. And what I do is sometimes, if you were to come to that, you would ring me, or you'd email me and say, can I come out to that? And I'd say, yes, I'll meet you here, and then I'll bring you into that environment, and you will engage with me, and we'll have a conversation while we're at the Hyde sculpture, and we can talk about anything. And I love that engagement because it's much more intimate, and I'm there. And for me, it's very important to find out what people think. I would ask the most reductive questions because artists sometimes struggle with the most simple questions to ask. And there's an empathy there in trying to figure out that with audience that's really super, super important.